Hey guys, I'm gonna come on and try to get China done in 15 minutes. Maybe try to limit it to two videos if I have to. So let's start with China. It's a semi-presidential parliamentary system. It is a unitary state, meaning it's one party. That's the Chinese Communist Party. The historical traditions of China are pretty important because it talks about, or it leaves its legacy and why China is the way that it is today. First, a Chinese citizen is a participant in, not citizen of the Chinese state, so that you're always secondary to the Chinese state. The Chinese state is all knowing, all powerful, and is most important is Xi Jinping and this control or centralization of power that he's been able to do over the last 6, 7 years. So communism is authoritarian rule. There's that ethic of struggle that Mao preached during the Cultural Leap Forward, or the Great Leap Forward. The ethic of struggle is you understand your life is going to be hard. There's nothing you can really do about that. Then you have Mao's four pest policy. I talked really briefly about that. He ends up getting rid of birds. That leads to a rise in insect population, which then leads to a famine that kills, on estimates, either 14 million on the low end, or some people have said 60 million on the high end. You have a philosophical background in Confucianism, so piety, humaneness, and ritual is all ingrained within the society. The cleavages, you have Han versus Uyghur Chinese. Those are two ethnic classes. Uyghur as the Muslim classes that are on the western border of China in Zhanjiang. City versus rural. That's pretty standard. Rich versus poor. That's pretty standard. The judicial court. It's a people's court. The CCP influences decisions both directly and indirectly. Party groups influence judicial appointments, and in response, as appointees must follow specific party guidelines. So it's basically like you have to be a part of the Chinese Communist Party in China, that's obvious. And if you're not being appointed. And if you're not appointed, you're not getting the judicial backing or judicial appointment that you wish. It's a 99% conviction rate in China. Like, if you're going to jail, you're going to jail. That's the end of it. Court adjudicative committees have the power to independently override court decisions. So even if you feel like you were in the right, if a committee says no, it doesn't matter. And then lower courts always seek the opinion of upper courts. So there is no real appeal process. Rule of law is all in accordance with the Chinese Constitution, which is the Chinese Communist Constitution, Chinese Party Constitution, and goes from there. The legitimacy, the military funding and equipment levels. Hu Jintao was a premier of China. Now, he wanted to make China a naval power. It ends up getting about 25 to 30% estimates of the nation's budget as it was continuing to grow. The military used to be a really strong influence in policymaking. That's that parallel hierarchy, which leads to a triple hierarchy. The military itself, however, has been losing control and representation in both the Standing Committee and the Politburo. Then you have Feng Shui policy, that's the tightening and loosening of restrictions and laws within the Chinese state. The people will want a protest or a loosening of a little bit of a law. The Chinese state will loosen it and then deem that the people's actions take it too far than what they initially had portrayed or explained, and then the Chinese government will be super strict over that. I put a really good diagram on Google Classroom of that, so you could take a peek at that. The executive titles: General Secretary of the CPC, that's the Central Committee. Xi Jinping has been in there since 2012. So he's the leader of the party. Then you have the president of the People's Republic of China, Xi Jinping, since 2013. Since 93, these two positions have been the same person. They are the head of state. They theoretically serve at the will of the legislative house, which isn't true. Like, theoretically on paper, yes, not in actuality. The National People's Congress. To be involved, you must be a citizen. You must be 45 years old to be the president. There was an age limit. You were kicked out once you were 65. That no longer exists. So now Xi Jinping declares laws, dismiss the premier, pardon, state of emergency. Very simple. Premier of the State Council, head of the government, informally a prime minister, limited to 2 5-year terms, organizing and administering Chinese civil bureaucracy, highest administrative position. And then the chairperson of the National Party Congress Standing Committee, appointed by the National Party Congress, fourth in line. Basically, the only power is that he is in line to the secession. There's two Congresses, the National People Congress and National Party Congress. National People Congress is 2,280 members. They are a unicameral legislative state with these two houses. The majority of the power is held in the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress. They have 170 members who meet regularly. The National People's Congress, they meet once a year for 2 weeks. This National Standing Committee meets regularly. So a term in the National People's Congress is 5 years. The National Party Congress, held every 5 years, highest governing body in the CCP, and they basically decide, like, this is the path that we want to go as a Chinese state, this is the path that we want to go as a party, and they'll make leadership changes and adjust any possible amendments to the Constitution. So that was held most recently, 2019, with Xi Jinping removing age limits and term limits on his own control. Party of the People. If you're not in the Chinese Communist Party, your life is not going anywhere. You have to be in the party. You have to show fealty to the party and give up all that. Elections. At the lowest level are there elections. Otherwise, there aren't any. Everybody else is appointed up the ladder, and that's the Guanji, the personal connections. All right, and then that's the parallel hierarchy. So the Chinese Communist Party hang on. All right, 7 minutes. Organization. You have the National Party Congress, Central Committee, top political members of the CCP, 205 members, elected every single year. Selection is done privately with the advice of the Standing Committee and the Politburo. Has the power to elect a General Secretary, and they meet at least once a year for the for the Central Committee. Above the Central Committee, you have the Politburo. Politburo is 25 members. They're elected by the the Central Committee. Their political power rests because they serve dual roles in the People's Republic of China, so they serve both in the party and in the Senate. They meet once a month. Above them is the Standing Committee. 5 to 7 members conduct any and all policy decisions determined through deliberations and straw polling. Their decisions become de facto law. Every single time a new Chinese ruler comes in, the Standing Committee gets stronger and stronger. Then all the way at the top, you have the CMC, the Central Military Commission, parallel to the CPC and the PRC, so Standing Committee, Politburo, and exactly the same as the Central Committee members, so going back here. So this CMC, once upon a time, had a ton of power, not necessarily as much anymore. Control of 6.8 active million troops and 10 million reserve troops. Factionalism, you're talking about Tiananmen Square. According to the Chinese state, that didn't happen. We know it did. That's that famous man in front of the tank video. Tiananmen Square is where there was a student worker protest against rights or for more rights, and the Chinese government came in the middle of the night and put the protest down. Parallel hierarchy, I talked about. It's you go up in the party, you go up in the government, and then at the top level, you end up getting involved in the military as well. Chairman Mao wanted to create a peasant-based society after reading Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto. He thought that this agricultural-based society was the future, and he puts in place this great leap forward. I talked about the four P's policy. The biggest thing with Mao is collectivization. He put people in communes. This led to people lying about grain production because if you didn't say that you hit this certain number, you would die. So if there's tons and tons of people misaccurately representing how much grain is actually being produced, you're going to have famine, you're going to have mass amounts of death and just corruption inherently within the system. So people were quoted as having to eat tree bark or coal. So that's collectivization. Then you have industrialization. It was estimated that, or it was predicted or proposed that you were going to donate all your steel back to the state. So a lot of people start creating these backyard furnaces, donating everything, pots, pans, everything back into the system. It absolutely made no sense. And this is where the stigma of Chinese steel being weak comes out. So now these two, the Great Leap Forward estimates 14 to 45 million to possibly 60 million dead as a result of it. The 100 Flowers campaign. So Mao puts up this idea of a mass line, and that means that you're allowed to go in and complain about what the government is doing. a lot of people have been critical over this idea because this is believed that Mao set this up solely to weed out any dissenters of the state. It's basically how it is today, where if you are going to protest in China or Russia, you have to tell them who's protesting, why are you protesting, where are you protesting, and here's all the people involved. It's really a really shady situation. Population policy under Mao. Mao thought population control was capitalist and counter to its agricultural society. Deng Xiaoping comes in after Mao, and he creates the one-child policy. If you had other kids, or if you had kids more than one child, you would end up being fined, or you wouldn't be able to have that kid officially registered. So this whole generation of unregistered citizens within the Chinese state that technically aren't allowed to really get a job, go to school, because they're illegals. Then you have a new shift under Xi Jinping is now shifted to a two-child policy. Okay, we should be able to do this. Two-child policy to help balance out first the old population of the Chinese state and then the male population of the Chinese state. So Jiang Zemin, the biggest thing about him is he got the Beijing Olympics put through in 2008. Hu Jintao creates BRIC, the Brazil, Russia, India, and China Economic Trade Group. And then you end up getting Xi Jinping, and you have the centralization of powers. Xi has asserted his dominance over the Chinese state. He's asserted his control not only over the Chinese state, but really pushing for control over Southeast Asia. When you look at the islands he's building in the South China Sea, when you look at the territorial nature of the Chinese Navy expanding into the South China Sea, claiming their own international water lines, and Chinese state water lines and borders and boundaries. He's really flexing his muscles. The Chinese economy has grown by 10% a year since the 1980s. A lot of people have said that that's completely inflated. Some of that's correct, some of that isn't. They own about $1.3 trillion of our debt. So it's a real strong push by Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party over the last 2 or 3 decades. He does not have an age limit or a year limit on him anymore. He's removed that. He is very strict on anti-corruption. Anyone that he deems that is being corrupt against the state has been arrested, been killed, been imprisoned, or been exiled. So he has put in extremely strict anti-corruption laws. But that's also like to a degree of like, well, it's not corrupt to be critical of Xi Jinping, but he'll deem it corrupt. So he's really consolidated and really limited the opposition within the state. The coronavirus, a lot of people have been really critical over how the Chinese state has handled this. Have they been accurate with the reporting? Have they truly had only 80,000 cases, or has the numbers been significantly inflated or significantly protected? Outside influences or outside commentary and media has said that they've lied about their numbers since day one. Inside of the Chinese state, they said that they've had control over it basically within the first week, and then it's never going to come back. So that's a complete other question that would take another 15, 20, 30, 40 minutes. All right, so I'm going to stop it there because that's China, and then I'll refilm a new one for Nigeria. I'll post this today, and then we'll talk about it tomorrow if you need anything. All right, see ya.